Hey everyone, we are here today. We're going to talk about reinforcement. Why is ABA using it so much? Why do we always push for reinforcement? And how can we apply it? One of the very first things that parents always ask me is, why should I reinforce my child's behavior for something that they should just know to do? Why should I give them something for it? Well, to answer that, we have to look at a few different things. A lot of times parents feel like when we are reinforcing these behaviors, we're actually bribing them. In fact, there are big differences between bribery and reinforcement. One of the main ones is that bribery is just a quick fix. When we bribe a child to behave, usually we're offering them that in the middle of their behavior. For example, if we are at the grocery store with a child, let's use my children for example, we're walking through the grocery store, we're walking through that cookie aisle, they see something that catches their eye, they want it. They say, Mom, can we have these cookies? No, we can't have them today. Okay, they don't like to hear that. So what is the first thing they do? They flop to the floor. They might start crying. They might start yelling. They escalate their behavior. It increases, and all of a sudden they are having a full-blown tantrum. I've been there. I've witnessed it. I've experienced it. So a lot of times as a parent, our job then, we get a little frantic, we get worried because now all eyes are on us, they're causing a scene, so we say, okay, if you just stand up, if you behave, then I will get you a cookie. That is a bribe. That's happening in the middle of their behavior, and in fact, it's actually reinforcing that behavior. So next time when they're in the grocery store, all they have to do is know, if I want a cookie, I just have to sit down and have a tantrum, and Mom will give in and I'll get a cookie. What we can do instead is we can set up the grocery store trip beforehand and give them the specific rules that they need in order to get that cookie. So before we go in, we can use our pre-MAC principle or give them some contingencies. We can use first then language or if then language. So for example, if we go through this grocery store, you stay with the cart, you walk with me the entire time, we use inside voice, we have hands to ourselves, we're not grabbing things, then you can get a cookie. So our job as parents is then to make sure that we are providing that reinforcement when they follow through. If they don't follow through, if they break those rules that we've set up ahead of time, we need to also make sure that we still don't give them that cookie. They need to know that our rules and our boundaries are going to be in place for a reason. So stay strong, parents. No matter what behaviors they throw at you, we have to be consistent. We have to make sure that we're reinforcing the right things. Sometimes we reinforce ourselves by getting them to be quiet and stop having people stare at us. But in the long run, we're actually reinforcing those inappropriate behaviors. So that addresses that question. So we don't use bribery, we use reinforcement. Now, another question that I'm constantly asked is, why should I reinforce behaviors that they should just do just because? I don't get reinforced for sitting quietly on a bus, so why should my child be reinforced for sitting on a bus? So a couple things come to mind here. A lot of times we have what are called intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So we have that internal motivation to do things because we get something out of it. We benefit from it. It makes us feel better. In ABA, we refer to those as automatic reinforcement. We can reinforce ourselves. We don't need anybody else. Could be those sensory behaviors. You just do it because it makes you feel good or because you have to, and that's it. Then we have those extrinsic behaviors or that extrinsic motivation. In ABA, we call those socially mediated behaviors or socially mediated motivation. In this scenario, that's when you have to have that external influence. You need other people to help motivate you. It could be through praise and acknowledgement of your good work. It could be giving a tangible or receiving an item. Those are all examples of that socially mediated reinforcement. Alright, so next we're going to talk about how often do we need to be providing reinforcement. So there's different schedules of reinforcement. For those of you RBTs in training, playing along at home, we're covering task list number C3 for this one. So we have 3 different schedules of reinforcement, really, so we're going to talk about 2 of them. Continuous reinforcement is the first kind. For continuous reinforcement, we are constantly reinforcing those behaviors as soon as they happen. So let's pretend we're just living in this perfect society where nothing goes wrong. So let's think about a light switch. Every time we flip that switch on, the light comes on, we're being reinforced. Every time. When we are teaching a new skill to a child, when it's in skill acquisition, we're in that learning phase, we want to make sure that we're going heavy with reinforcement. We're going to use that continuous reinforcement to keep them encouraged. So thinking about potty training, for all those parents out there that I'm helping out right now with potty training, every single time the child sits on that potty, we're reinforcing it. If they use the restroom at all, every time they're sitting on it, oh, we're really reinforcing that every single time. Later, we can fade out that reinforcement so it's not heavy. And when we do that, we're moving into what's called intermittent schedules of reinforcement. With those schedules of reinforcement, you have two different options. You can have fixed schedule or a variable schedule. A fixed schedule means that every time you're going to reinforce a behavior. So let's say it's a fixed ratio schedule, so we would call it an FR3. So let's say every 3 times we flip that light switch, it actually comes on. That would be an FR3. A more realistic example would be if we're working with a child, every 3 skills or every 3 tasks we have them perform, we're going to provide a reinforcer through token economy or a break, a small tangible, a toy, anything that is reinforcing for that child. If we were doing a variable schedule, we could do a variable ratio schedule, a VR3, and in that case it would be about every time. So about every 3 tasks or about every 3 skills that we ask a child to perform, we're going to provide that reinforcement. So with those, you can have the ratios, which is that the amount of time something happens. So you can have a fixed ratio every 3 times, or you can have a variable ratio about every 3 times. It could be more, it could be less. And then we can have interval schedules. So that would be when we're looking at time. So about every 3 minutes if we did a variable interval of 3. So VI3 would be about every 3 minutes. This child sitting and working nicely, we're going to provide that reinforcement. If we were looking at a fixed interval, an FI3, that would be every 3 minutes. So not 2 minutes, not 4 minutes or 5 minutes, it's every 3 minutes. We're going to set our timers, we're going to make sure every 3 minutes that child's getting a break or that child is getting that reinforcement. Okay, so when we're looking at reinforcement, we have to keep a few things in mind. We have to make sure, A, that it's actually reinforcing for them. The definition of reinforcement is receiving something so that behaviors increase in the future. So if we don't see that increase in the behaviors in the future, then we're not actually reinforcing them. A lot of times, parents will say, well, I've tried reinforcing little Timmy, but it's just not working. Reinforcement doesn't work for my child. Well, that means that we haven't found the right reinforcer yet. So we think that little Timmy should be motivated by popsicles, but he just doesn't like popsicles. So we've got to find something that he does like. And we can do those through preference assessments, questionnaires, checklists. We can ask him, what do you like? What do you want to work for? And let them have some input on that. For those children who are nonverbal, then we can talk to their parents about it. What are some things that they like? Or we could formally test it through those, again, those preference assessments. So we're going to say, here's a teddy bear, here's a popsicle, which one do you want? And kind of get a hierarchy from there. I can go in more detail about preference assessments later if that's something that you guys want to hear more about. My last piece of advice about reinforcers is that it's critical that we make it worthwhile. So if, again, let's say this is a skill that's in acquisition, sitting appropriately is a big one. Those attending skills for those little guys or our new learners, things that are harder for them, we want to make sure that we reinforce appropriately. So if little Timmy has not ever sat for a minute appropriately, and all of a sudden this is the very first time he sits appropriately for a full minute, woo, we're going to have a big party. We're going to get really excited, and we're going to up that reinforcement. Maybe we can say, oh, that was perfect sitting. You can have a break. We can be done for a minute. Or wow, you did such a good job sitting. Here's these animal crackers. If Timmy doesn't usually get animal crackers, we're going to give it to him now. So we're going to really up those reinforcements. Excuse me. So once it becomes an independent skill, once that it becomes more frequently occurring, so he's sitting for longer periods of time for more often, then that's when we're going to slowly, gradually decrease that reinforcement schedule. So then we're going to go maybe into that variable schedule from the fixed schedule. Or if we're still in a fixed schedule, maybe instead of a FR3, we're going to move it to an FR6. So every 6 responses, then they're going to get reinforced. So you guys decide, you work with your BCBA or whoever's in charge of your programming, and you just kind of test a few things out, see what works best for you guys. And then again, make sure that we're really just constantly catching them being good. That's critical. I know it's hard and it's frustrating at first to have to constantly reinforce them for things that we feel like you should just know how to do this, or you should do it just because I am asking you to. But that's harder. We have to teach those skills. We can't make a child who's extrinsically motivated, socially mediated motivated, we can't suddenly make them have automatic reinforcement. We can't make them feel that way. We can't make them intrinsic learners right away. We have to use pairing, and it takes a little while. So hang in there. Don't be discouraged. Make sure we find those right reinforcers, and we make it worthwhile for them. I think that's it for today. So any questions, comments, concerns, please comment below. As usual, like, subscribe, and let's continue on this journey of learning together.